This summer, erratic weather raged across the world.
The last 8 years have been the 8 hottest years on record since 1850.
From heat waves to floods, the climate is changing.
几乎上都颗粒无收，去年没得到收入了。
熱到咧，真係咧，試過有時夜晚啊，熱到幾乎暈。
How did communities across Asia cope with these extreme events?
我们呢，就积极的动员，根据上面的要求，动员咱们村的村民设临时安置点，我们在山上。
And are they a sign of things to come?
Someone says it's no longer a warming world, right? It is a boiling world.
덕평일리 주민 여러분, 안녕하십니까? 잠시 주민 여러분께 안내 말씀 드리겠습니다.
4 times a day, Cho Chae-won, the village chief of Deokpyeongri village in South Korea, fires up his PA system, issuing a heat warning to residents.
지속되는 찜통 더위로 인해 온열 질환자가 속출하고 있습니다. 지금 작업하고 계시는 분이 계시면 작업을 중단하시고 시원한 경로당 무더위 쉼터로 오셔서 휴식을 취한 뒤 아침 저녁으로 작업을 해주시기를 당부드리겠습니다.
South Korea has just experienced one of its hottest summers on record. In Deokpyeongri, a village 3 hours outside the capital Seoul, temperatures exceeded 38 degrees Celsius.
올해 지금 한 15일째 찜통더위가 지속되고 있거든요. 올해 다른 해보다 많이 더 더운 것 같습니다.
장마철이 끝나자마자 대체로 맑은 날씨가 이어지면서 기온이 많이 올라가는 그런 폭염 현상들이 나타나는데 가장 최근에 7월 하순부터 8월 지금 상순 정도까지 폭염이 이어지고 있어서 최근의 기억 때문에 조금 덥고 더위가 오래 간다라고 느끼실 수는 있습니다.
This summer, the Earth sweltered. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, July was the hottest month since records began 174 years ago. It was 1.18 degrees warmer than the average July between 1951 and 1980. But worryingly, this year's extreme weather may not be an anomaly, but rather part of a longer trend.
The World Meteorological Organization recently confirmed that the last 8 years have been the 8 hottest years on record since 1850. Now, this is especially worrying because 2021 and 2022 were both under the influence of La Nina in the equatorial Pacific.
During La Nina, changing winds and ocean currents typically bring cooler temperatures. Instead, climate change may have flipped the script.
The fact that these 2 years were included in the top 8 hottest years on record points to a larger underlying global warming trend.
From wildfires to drought, the weather wreaked havoc across Asia this year. In South Korea, the mercury climbed past 35 degrees Celsius, prompting the government to raise the heat warning to its highest level, the first time in 4 years. At the World Scouts Jamboree, hundreds succumbed to heat sickness. And by the start of August, at least 23 people had died across South Korea from the soaring temperatures. Some of the casualties were elderly farmers.
농촌에 이제 일손이 딸리니까 내 몸이 그 무리가 가고 있는데도 할 수밖에 없으니까 그러신 것 같은데요.
알았죠? 내가 허리가 아프면은 더 이거를 충실히 하셔야 됩니다.
To beat the heat, the Deokpyeongri village hall was converted into a refuge from the scorching sun.
사랑합니다. 사랑합니다.
Air conditioning, paid for by the government, keeps the temperature at a pleasant 25 degrees.
왜 그러냐면은 각 가정에서 어르신들이 난방비 걱정, 에어컨 쓰면 전기요금 걱정 때문에 못 드시니까 경로당 무더위 쉼터로다가 지원을 많이 해주시는 게 집집마다 에어컨 켜는 것보다 여기 에어컨 2대 켜고 어르신들이 와서 생활하시는 게 전체적으로 보면 우리나라 전체로 보면 그게 더 이익이죠. 전기도 아낄 수 있고.
We've certainly seen a summer of extreme events in North America, Asia, and Europe. And with climate change, record temperatures we see now will become the new normal in the coming decades. And that's a pretty grim outlook.
Doing well, comfortable, nice warm up.
If heat waves become more commonplace, it will be important to understand the effects of temperature on the body.
20 seconds, then we'll ask you how hot again and how hot are you feeling.
Something that is being studied at the Heat Resilience and Performance Center in Singapore.
So we are walking her at 4K per hour speed. So what we are doing here is we got a baseline, we got a rating of perceived exertion.
The center is part of the National University of Singapore. Some of its research involves helping people cope in an increasingly warm world. This chamber can simulate various environmental conditions. The temperature is currently being set at 32 degrees Celsius, with a humidity of 70%, similar to a typical July day in Singapore. The team keeps track of body functions like heart rate and core temperature.
125 beats. So this represents how hot she's feeling. Also with thermal strain and cardiovascular strain, right, we can also calculate her overall physiological strain. This is a good index for us to ascertain how hard an individual is working. Are you okay? Very good.
So what happens when a human feels hot, right? Immediately your brain will trigger this, okay, I need to lose the heat. And predominantly, number one, we push the blood internally to the skin. And if the environment has a gradient for you to lose the heat, right, then it's fine. But when somebody is exercising or when the environment is harsh, right, you need to activate your sweat glands and therefore to evaporate the sweat. Okay, bear in mind, sweating alone does not lose heat. The sweat needs to be evaporated.
This is where humidity becomes critical. On hot days, water evaporates more quickly, raising ambient humidity. The air becomes saturated with moisture, and your sweat can no longer evaporate effectively.
So the more wet, more humid the environment is, you'll find that you will struggle to lose the heat that you produce. Sweating, but the sweat is not evaporated, then your heart will be working harder and harder. At some point, if you have a limited or a constrained cardiovascular capacity, you will pay the price, you will collapse, some may get heart attack, and that's exactly what happens during a classical heat waves.
But on a much larger scale, increased moisture in the air can have devastating effects. Heat and tropical storms are closely linked.
Well, tropical cyclones or typhoons in this region, as it is known, derive their energy from the moisture which evaporates from the warm ocean waters. So as this warm, moist air is unstable, it rises, it cools, it condenses to form clouds and rain. And in that process, it draws in more moisture and more air. And as this process accelerates, it creates a continuous cycle and therefore promoting the development of more severe typhoons.
Areas in northeastern China dealing with a deluge there as storms triggered in the wake of Typhoon Doksuri worsened floods and submerged villages.
Typhoon Doksuri was one of the worst to hit northern China. It brought the heaviest rains in 140 years. With waters flooding streets and shops in Beijing, authorities decided to take drastic measures. Officials in Hebei province, which borders the capital, diverted the waters from Beijing to other towns. The move further inundated the adjacent city of Zuozhou, which had been struggling to contain its own floods after a levee broke and a local river overflowed.
60年才来一回，而且这帮人就是说大部分人都没有见到过，因为我也没见到过。
Brothers Zhang Lei and Zhang Yin have been working hard to save their city, volunteering for the recovery and rescue efforts.
完了呢，我呢给安排到那个河道了，就是看河道，如果水来了，跟群里呢就是村里啊及时汇报。这么着的话呢，就是，眼瞅着这水啊，就是一点点往上蔓延，特别快。后来我就是陆续的给村里说赶紧撤离，赶紧撤离。完了呢，就是走了很大一部分，但是呢，我们这些人呢是没走了。
China usually reaches peak rainy season in late July. But even as we enter September, China continues to be hammered by more rain. Meanwhile, its neighbors, the Philippines, Japan and South Korea, had all been battered by typhoons.
Countries which are closer to warm ocean waters, for example, are more prone to heavy monsoonal rainfalls and typhoons. Regions further inland are more prone to extreme temperature variations and drought. And countries which have high topography may experience intense rainfall on the mountain slopes, and that could lead to landslides and floods.
In Zuozhou, the floodwaters had begun to recede by August. But the fallout from the catastrophe could linger for months.
现在就目前而言，最需要的就是人员工具。首要的是，现在也是夏天，虽然说已经立秋了，也是夏天，这些淤泥滋生细菌，而且大水冲过来，动物的尸体，夏天一弄全变质，变质以后这滋生细菌。 疫情，
最快还得半个月能把这个街道清理完。
Elsewhere, 65-year-old Mo Yongfu returns to his home in the Mengduoguo district west of Beijing.
你看我家里成什么样？ 你看我这个餐厅、床柜，这整个的全冲成这样，到这位置，这不是水位到这位置吗？在咱们家庭预算，就说连这个就说把一层全部淹没了，现在家庭这个损失最起码的不低于15万至20万。
To alleviate the damage caused by flooding, China has pre-allocated $139 million for flood relief efforts. But these funds will quickly run out should floods and heat waves become a regular occurrence.
Unless global emissions are drastically reduced very soon, the world is likely to exceed 2 degrees global mean warming above pre-industrial average. And under that scenario, Asia will more likely experience more frequent and more long-lasting heat waves, more intense rainfall, particularly over continental Asia, And at the other end of the scale, over parts of Southeast Asia, we can see areas which show more dry conditions and longer dry spells.
And if the unpredictable weather persists, it could lay waste to the food we eat. These are maize plants, also known as corn. It's a cereal crop that's consumed in large parts of the world, and also an important feedstock for farm animals. Tending to these fields is 33-year-old Wang Guoning, a farmer in Wanyuan City in Sichuan province in China. But recently, her crops have come under attack.
去年那个干旱，就是玉米干的就像可以点燃火的感觉，很多树都被干死了，几乎上都颗粒无收，去年没得到收入了。
Last year, China experienced its worst heat wave and drought in 6 decades. In many parts of the country, the temperature climbed above 40 degrees. And there was no reprieve this year, as the heat returned with a vengeance. In northern China, the thermometer touched 52 degrees. Meanwhile, several provinces, including Sichuan, experienced drought and forest fires. Most experts agree that the extreme heat is likely caused by climate change.
So the Earth has a natural greenhouse effect where certain gases in the atmosphere like carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, trap heat from the sun. So these allow radiation from the sun to enter the atmosphere, but they're also very good at trapping heat from the surface. So as human activities have caused levels of greenhouse gases to go up in the atmosphere, these traps more heat and therefore enhances the greenhouse effect, and which leads to the rising temperatures that we observe today.
Heat can have a devastating impact on crops. For maize, thermal stress causes it to fruit early. This means the kernels are smaller than usual, reducing yields. Learning from last year's experience, Wang was prepared for the adverse weather.
今年我们比去年那个种植的也早20几天，今年刚好就错开那个时间了。这个时候现在又干旱了嘛。 玉米已经背上了，已经那个有果实了，都干旱都减少了损失了。
Nonetheless, China saw a drop in its summer grain harvest, the first dip in 5 years. Other grain-growing nations like Ukraine, India, and the United States have also struggled with extreme weather. If climate conditions persist, maize yields could fall by a quarter come the end of the century.
Globally, we produce about 1.1 billion metric tons of maize. And maize is one of the highest industry utilization crop. We use it for human consumption. We use it for animal feed. We use it for ethanol production, and also for industrial use. So it has very wide use of corn. So any change or dramatic change in volume of production will cause our maize price to surge to an all-time high.
About 60% of the maize grown around the world is used for animal feed. As maize prices go up, so will the price of animal produce.
For example, it takes 2.5 kilograms of grain of corn to convert 1 kilogram of chicken, right? So assuming a 10 cents increase of your grain input will be 2.5 times amplified even at the farm level per kilogram of meat. Food affordability will become a next challenge.
Here at Chengxiangan's chicken farm in Sichuan, the maize grown by Wang is used to feed the poultry.
这是 啊，主要是玉米，65%的玉米，还有就是豆腐、麸皮，那个豆谷和麸皮要加在一起，不然的话营养不够。
Zheng grows about 50,000 chickens a year, mainly for export to Beijing.
这个鸡院黑鸡啊，它就是它这个鸡冠，它一般的话都是这种重冠的，它比较大。一般的话，就是其他黑鸡的话，它是一种单冠。还有就是它这个羽毛啊，在太阳下面，它闪闪发光的，它就显现一种翠绿色的这种光芒。
But as the price of feedstock ticked upwards, Zheng is finding it a struggle to keep up with costs.
现在售价，现在这个鸡，比如说就是消费的群体，它也是比较小，因为它这个鸡的价格本来就高，所以说在这个5个月的时候，基本上一天的话，一个鸡增加的成本在4毛左右，1个月都10多块钱，但是销售的时候，肯定是把这个成本卖不出来。
And just like with plants, extreme heat can be deadly for farm animals.
天太热，它就是吃的东西比较少，它可能会延长它就是出栏的时间。我们现在就是所有的鸡舍上面，里面都加了这个排风扇，还有顶上加了那个风帽，让它的空气循环。这样的话，它对这个室内温度就要好一些。这个鸡啊，其实它适合散养，它就是本来这个鸡它的性格比较暴躁，像这个天气越大，它的心里面就像人一样比较烦，就是每一天打架的就是像现在新成熟过后打架的都比较多，死亡也比较大。
And there is one more part of agriculture cowed by the hot weather: the farmers themselves. According to the National Institutes of Health, farm workers are 35 more times likely to die of heat than others. A problem even more dire for countries with aging populations like South Korea.
많이 더웠어요. 밭에 갔다가 10시경에 오는데 얼마나 더운지
나 안 나가시는 게 제일 나아요. 어쩔 수 없어.
근데 곡식을 따와요.
As the young eschew agriculture, about half of farm workers in South Korea are now above the age of 65, an age group particularly vulnerable to heat stress.
Elderly has a limited cardiovascular capacity, and when you are being heat stressed, your hearts need to work a lot harder. Elderly also sick, and therefore certain medications can also compromise their ability to lose it. And then if elderly, if you are alone, when you are in danger, there's no next of kin, next one beside you, then you are also very vulnerable.
Even before noon, the weather has already become too hot for chili farmer Huang Zhongwu. He takes a break, but this means leaving his fields untended until the sun lets up.
작물이 항상 걱정이지 뭐. 그냥 사람은 쉬면 되는데 밭곡식이나 뭐 곡식들은 좀 다 피해를 많이 보니까 뭐 고온 장애도 있지. 이제 수확이 많이 떨어졌지 뭐.
So, be it plant, animal, or the health of the farmer, as heat waves become more regular and intense, the impact on our food supply chains could be debilitating.
According to the IPCC report, why we are so concerned about global increase in temperature 2 degrees Celsius, that is the key threshold for all living organisms. The moment it hits 2 degrees Celsius, the probability of seeing crop failure will be at 80%. And that will become a very, very challenging topic globally.
Meanwhile, away from the farms, in the urban centres, this summer's erratic weather is changing the way we live and work. For several hours each day, 51-year-old Hong Sung-wang finds himself perched on a utility pole. He installs network cables for LG Hellovision, a broadcasting company in South Korea. Hong has been on the job for 20 years, but this summer has been especially grueling.
대부분이 전주에서 저희가 오랫동안 있을 때는 1시간 반에서 2시간 정도 전주 땡볕에 있어야 되거든요. 근데 그럴 때 때로는 이제 현기증이 생기죠. 근데 그럴 때마다 이제 쉽게 말해서 가족들, 내 주위에 있는 동료들이라든가 가족들을 생각하면서 이겨내는 거죠.
During these episodes, Hong could be experiencing heat exhaustion, which occurs when the body overheats. At worst, it could lead to heat stroke, a potentially fatal condition. In just one weekend in July, South Korea recorded at least 17 heat-related deaths. But for Hong, he feels he must tough it out in the sweltering sun.
더위에 누군가는 해줘야 되는 업무를 하고 있는 거거든요. 근데 그 일을 어쨌든 안 할 수는 없는 게 노동자들의 입장이거든요.
Heatwaves cost billions in productivity loss. If the weather hits 33 to 34 degrees Celsius, those doing physically demanding jobs could see performance drop by half. But for some, they have to plow on regardless.
For most of us, right, when you're hot, you have the option to say, okay, I will postpone my picnic or outdoor activity this weekend. We can't say that for our workers. They are toiling out there for hours, for weeks, for months, for years. At some point, the physiology will be compromised. And often one risk factor besides the chronic heat exposure, these workers, some of them are being paid by piece. If I don't work, I have no bread to bring home at the end of the day. And therefore, they will risk it. They will work hard, disregarding the temperature, and therefore predispose themselves at a much higher risk.
In Seoul, the government made policy changes after 2018's record-breaking heatwave, which killed at least 42 people.
저희 공공시설, 공공에서 관리하는 공사장의 경우, 특히 18년 이후에 서울시에서 관리하고 있는 공사장의 경우에는 저희가 내부적으로 방침을 받아서 예를 들면 8시간을 근무를 해야지 일당을 받아가신다. 일당을 예를 들어서 15만 원을 칩시다. 그러면 폭염으로 인해서 2시부터 5시가 35도가 넘어서 휴게 시간을 가져야 된다고 하면 그 빠지는 3시간에 대해서도 일을 한 걸로 쳐서 수당을 그대로 지급해 드리는 방향으로 서울시에서는 방침을 정해서 진행하고 있습니다. 그런데 아무래도 이 부분들은 공공이기 때문에 저희가 이렇게 드릴 수 있는 부분이고, 민간 사업장 같은 경우는 아무래도 좀 사업의 순위가 좀 직결되는 부분이라서 저희가 강제를 하거나 이렇게 할 수는 없지만, 아마 자체적으로는 조금 그 집중되는 시간대 2시, 5시에서는 피하고 그 후에 조금 일을 하는 형태로 해서 그에 맞게 수당을 받아가지 않나, 이렇게 조금 저도 알고 있습니다.
Often having to toil while exposed to the elements, construction workers are especially at risk. Dr. Lee Kwong-sing is the chairman of the Hong Kong Institute of Safety Practitioners. He works with construction management teams to implement safety measures in the city.
其實就有嘅，勞工處咧就今年出咗一本熱嘅即係所謂熱應力指數嘅一本指南啦。咁裏邊咧都有講到咧，佢就會分3種嘅黃色、紅色、黑色暑熱警告。咁佢當佢出某個暑熱警告嘅時候咧，就建議啲工友做1個鐘頭就15分鐘，即係就休息啦咁。係㗎，呢幾年真係越嚟越熱嘅，以前好少咁熱嘅日子嘅。咁但係我哋最 麻煩嘅地方就係做地盤，一定係戶外工作㗎嘛，大部分嘅時候戶外工作，所以我哋無可避免㗎。唯一可以做嘅就係加強通風、加遮陰，咁咪令到個師傅冇咁熱咯。但係你話熱唔熱，一定係好熱。
Get yourself accustomed to the heat progressively, and if you have the opportunity to incorporate rest in your work, don't just work continuously. Bear in mind, when someone is uncomfortable, decision is often being compromised, and therefore accidents. We are seeing accidents day in, day out too.
But for others, staying indoors doesn't offer much relief. 65-year-old Wong Kwai Hoi is a retiree living in the Hong Kong neighborhood of Sham Shui Po. He resides in this tiny space measuring about 65 square feet, roughly half a standard parking space in Hong Kong.
我依家自己住咯，自己住咯，租金就2800，加埋水電都係成3000幾蚊㗎啦，政府補助呢得2000零蚊就根本唔夠㗎，我連生活費都要貼埋落去㗎。
These minute apartments are common dwellings for the impoverished in Hong Kong, one of the most densely populated places in the world. In these cramped quarters, ventilation is poor. Wong's flat doesn't even have a window.
所以影響個心情呢，依家我都要覆診睇醫生㗎，唔病一邊病㗎。有時真係屈到呢，自己會暈，覺得暈要食藥㗎。
Dense housing is found across Hong Kong. Buildings and skyscrapers are cramped together, jostling for what little space is available. This concrete jungle actually exacerbates the heat buildup through something called the urban heat island effect.
The problem with cities is that they are dense. They have a dense number of buildings which restricts airflow, natural airflow. They tend to have less green space. And they also have a large amount of building materials, roads, infrastructure, concrete. And so they trap heat from the sun during the day, which then dissipates at night. But it's much harder for this to dissipate because of the urban density in itself. This is one of the main key points of the urban heat island effect, that the nighttime temperatures are not going down as much as they ought to be.
In the last 150 years, our global temperatures have risen around 1 degree centigrade. But here in a city like Singapore, because of the urban heat island effect, in the last 50 or 60 years, temperatures have gone up 3 to 4 degrees.
In extreme cases, urban centres can be 10 to 15 degrees hotter than their rural surroundings. And even though Wong has an air conditioner, it sits idle in a corner of his room.
由於呢，我做咩有冷氣唔敢開呢？係嘛，一定要慳㗎，因為我哋收我幾百蚊嗰個水電費呢，係嘛，就係影響到我生活呢，開支呢係好困難，所以有冷氣都唔敢開。包括嗰附近幾個劏房人都係單身人，都係好困難。300-400蚊，咁我點食都冇。我試過真係出去深水埗街市呢，真係執嘢食㗎。所以依家我參加義工呢，社區就時時俾到啲食物我。
Any problem of extreme weather will always hit the most vulnerable in society. Also people who are not as wealthy, who tend to live in maybe more overcrowded housing conditions. Maybe they don't have access to air conditioning, or some of the things that more wealthy people would be able to mitigate the immediate impacts of heat with.
In South Korea, the destitute are also bearing the brunt of the hot weather. Today, volunteers from the Seoul City Bridge Support Center are making their rounds through the capital, distributing water, food and salt candies to the homeless.
공원 이제 정자에서 주무실 때 막 벌레나 그런 거는 괜찮으세요?
모기 좀 있어요.
모기가 좀 있어요. 다음번에 올 때 여기 모기 이렇게 안 물리게 하는 거 그런 거 바르는 거 좀 갖다 드릴까요?
이제 뭐 여름 다 지났는데.
아 그래요? 그래도 밤에 30도 넘더라고요.
30도 너무 더워요.
너무 덥죠. 요거 하고
There are around 14,000 homeless people across the country. With no permanent shelter, they're particularly vulnerable to heat injuries. For those that are high risk, the volunteers invite them back to the Salisbury Centre's emergency shelter. The shelter provides water, food, shade, and more importantly, air conditioning.
현재 저희 브릿지 종합지원센터는 50인의 그 응급 잠자리를 제공하고 있고요. 오후 2시 반부터 접수를 시작해서 저녁 7시부터 그 다음 날 아침까지 여기서 지낼 수 있도록 되어 있습니다. 본인이 지낼 수 있는 기간은 20일 되게 되어 있고요. 그 뒤에 특별한 상황들이 있거나 어떤 그것들이 소명이 될 경우에는 한 달까지 연장할 수 있도록 되어 있습니다.
But with this year's intense weather, the centre has had to extend its services through the hottest parts of the day.
폭염은 지금 현재 되게 많이 어려운 상태고요. 혹서기에 대해서는 저희 브릿지 종합지원센터는 24시간 오픈을 해서 사람들이 언제든지 더위를 식힐 수 있도록 들어와서 쉴 수 있는 공간들을 내어드리고 있습니다.
Some who come here are elderly folk, like 75-year-old Young Sung-wook. For about 4 years, he's alternated between living in this shelter and being out on the streets.
충산물이 여기 처음 왔지만도 이런데 대한민국에 참 이런 데가 있다는 게 천만 다행이라고 생각해. 다른 데는 말대로 뭐 쪽방 같은데 이런 데는 생활은 나는 그런 데는 안 가봤지만 그런 생활한 데는 일부러 저기 여기와 잔다니까. 에어컨도 안 들어오고 뭐 저기 하는데.
The Earth is heating up because we're in a climate emergency. We're going to be dealing with these temperatures for decades to come. We need education to know this is a problem. So people can be informed when they should be outside and when they shouldn't be outside. If they are outside at the hottest parts of the day, they need to be hydrated. There needs to be cooling centres so they can escape the heat and keep themselves safe and secure.
But ironically, cooling ourselves could be adding to the heat problem. In Hong Kong, school's out for summer break. Graphic designer Sam Wong is taking his 4-year-old daughter for a treat. Some ice cream to beat the heat.
I think I've already spoiled by the air conditioned environment in Hong Kong, because no matter where I go, like my daily life, like more public transportation, my office or gym, they are all already air conditioned. So everywhere I go, there's something to cool me off. So when I go home, I must turn on the air conditioner as well. It's a natural thing for me.
Hong Kong just had its hottest summer on record. With Sam working from home and his daughter on vacation, air conditioning has become a crucial comfort.
We keep the air conditioner on about 19 hours a day. I have the fan on at the same time when I turn on the air conditioner, because I don't want to use the goes full power with my air conditioner. So I use the fan to kind of cool off the temperature in the room. I don't want the bill to get too expensive. The bill now, again, compared from the winter, it can gone up around $1,000, and for sure that is contributed by the air conditioning.
As temperatures and incomes rise, so has the use of air conditioning. In China, energy demand for space cooling has risen by 13% per year since 2000, compared to 4% globally. In ASEAN, the number of air conditioning units is projected to grow from 40 million in 2017 to 300 million in 2040. And in Korea, some of the growth will be funded by the government. For now, there is little reprieve from the heat for Cha Jae-sol. He lives in a jokbang, a form of affordable housing in Seoul. With each room about 2 square meters in size, most residents subsist on a basic living subsidy from the government.
환기는 안 되는 방도 있고, 유리창이 없는 방도 있고, 있는 방은 그래도 조금 환기가.
To help low-income residents endure the heat, the Seoul city government is funding the installation of air conditioning units in jokbangs like Jae-sol's.
세금이 작은 사각에 에어컨은 방마다 다 하는 거를 주민들이 바라는데 그게 이제 세금이 이렇게 옛날 거는 저거고 사각이 돼야 겨울에도 온풍되고 냉풍되니까 그거 사각 조금 작은 게 많이 나오는데 그거로 방마다 천장에 달린 거 그거 방마다 해줘야 해소가 되지 저거는 잘 안 되더라고요.
But there is a cost to air conditioning: energy. In South Korea, electricity demand surged in July, reaching its peak since records began in 2005. China too saw growing power consumption. Yet in many parts of Asia, electricity is still mainly generated by fossil fuels, adding more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere.
Many of these air conditioning units are very, very energy intensive. They use fossil fuels, and therefore you're compounding the problem. And therefore we need to think about different means of reducing our heat in the cities that don't rely on air conditioning.
In a search for other solutions, architects and engineers want to construct buildings that cool themselves. Like Gaia, Asia's largest building made from timber here at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. As a construction material, wood doesn't trap heat like concrete, and the building itself has almost no air conditioning.
The design of this building has huge fans above it that basically shade the building so it doesn't receive the direct temperature increase from sunlight. It also has natural airways, which mean that we don't rely on air conditioning. We use the structure of the building to filter air throughout the whole of the building, reducing its energy consumption. Finally, it has solar panels on the top of the building which provide the source that we need. This building, what are classified as carbon neutral. The amount of energy that we use is balanced by the amount of energy that we store or obtain from renewable energy sources.
By now, the world's hottest summer is almost over. But what the death tolls, the uncontrolled wildfires, and the unfettered floods tell us is that we are perhaps not yet ready for the effects of our changing climate.
We haven't had to deal with the types of heat in the past that we're having to deal with now. This is something that is very new to us. We're used to maybe dealing with things like floods or droughts, but we're not used to dealing with extreme heat and the problems that that causes.
Many decades ago, we warned that if we continue to build our greenhouse gas emissions, that you would have record-breaking temperatures associated with that heat waves and wildfires. We would see historic storms making landfall along our coastlines, causing immense destruction. Every one of those projections has come to pass. That doesn't surprise a climate scientist. What does surprise us is the lack of preparedness that we have. We have illustrated that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, we are not particularly resilient to what Mother Nature will do to us.
And should the world succeed in cutting emissions, any reversal in climate change will only be felt years from now. Meanwhile, this summer's weather could be a warning, a sign of our new normal.
It's important we take actions now and anticipate. In between now and the fruition of those carbon mitigation efforts, right, humans still need to survive and thrive. So these adaptation strategies are merely to buy us time. Make sure humans not just survive but can thrive in this warming environment. In fact, someone says it's no longer a warming world, right? It is a boiling world.